Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today I've travelled over to the west coast of England, to the wonderful county of Cheshire, just 10 miles from Wales, to meet up with our lucky competition winner, who is Lee. So Lee, if you want to come into video here. So this is Lee, congratulations. Lee is going to tell us all about his car and what his competition entry was. And just before I hand over to Lee, just a quick note that for those of you in the rest of the world, this competition is still open. Until the travel restrictions end, that competition will remain open, and hopefully we'll get a really good winner at the end of it. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Lee, and he's going to tell us all about his car and his competition entry.
Hi, my name's Lee Jones. I'm from Chester, England, and I won the competition to change spark plugs in my GTO. My GTO I've had for 6 years, and I've done a few sort of minor modifications. This is the engine bay. There's nothing really massively modified in here, it's kept pretty much stock. One of the mods I've done is had rotor wheels, which were lightweight compared to the original stock wheels, and it's also got custom lowering springs to give it a better ride height. Inside I've got rid of the stock seats. I'm trying to go for a more lightweight approach, and I've got these red Bride seats with Bride rails from Japan, custom gear knob and custom steering wheel. Everything else is pretty much stock inside. The final modification I've done was I needed a new exhaust, so I decided to go all out and go for a power flow exhaust. Nice big round tips either side, and it goes straight through to the cat back, and then I've got a blue flame downpipe that goes back up to the engine.
Well, thank you, Lee, for the wonderful introduction to your car, and I think everyone will agree with me. It's a gorgeous looking car, really nice condition, which is a real pleasure to see. So Lee's competition entry, as he's already said, was to replace the spark plugs. It's not a particularly difficult job for the man at home, as long as you know what to do. I've seen a few people on the forum mention that they've taken 4 to 6 hours to replace them. This is a job that can easily be done in under an hour with a little bit of time and knowledge. So I'm going to walk you through that in just a minute, but as usual, before we do, we'll have a quick look at the tools. Now, I'm going to do things slightly differently today because this isn't my car, and often we'll do things to our own car that we wouldn't do to someone else. So I've had to add a couple of extra bits just to make sure the job is done as safely as possible, seeing as it's someone else's car. So for tools, normal wrench, 1/2 inch, and on the end of that you're going to need a 12mm socket piece. A short extension may or may not come in handy somewhere through the job, but always useful to have. On the 3/8 drive, you're going to need your socket piece for your spark plug. Short extension will almost certainly come in handy, possibly a long extension, and a 12mm socket piece on the end. And then on the 1/4 inch drive, short extension again, and a 10mm piece on the end. Now, in addition to those pieces, you may notice I've brought along a 13mm as well for the 1/2 inch drive. This is because I've seen a couple of these cars where people have lost a 12mm nut. I'll show you where they've lost it in a minute, and because they've had trouble getting a 12mm, they've gone to a 13. So I was just prepared when I came today. A little pick tool may come in handy. There's 1 or 2 plugs we've got to take off. Sometimes that can be a bit tricky if you don't use a pick tool. I've got a pair of pincers here. Now, these are a little bit dated. I think these actually belong to my grandfather, but I've actually found it's a really useful tool for taking some of the clips off. There are specific tools you can buy to do the same job, but if you've got a pair of these in your shed somewhere, it'll save you buying the right tool. Then I mentioned about people losing nuts on the car, and if you lose those nuts, you're going to need a method to get them out. So this is a little gripper tool that opens up when you press on the knob at the end here. It allows you to get down into the bowels of the car and hopefully recover those missing nuts rather than having to replace them. And to reduce the chance of dropping the nut in the first place, I've got a nice high power magnet that will hopefully stop me dropping it into the car. Then we're going to need a feeler gauge. If you're fitting new spark plugs, you're going to need some way of setting them to the correct measurements. And we'll talk about the measurements in just a moment. Just before we do that, just finally the extra tools that I'm going to use on Lee's car. I'm going to be using a proper torque wrench. We're going to be setting that to 25 Newton meters, which is 15 pounds per square inch, just to make sure we tighten up the spark plugs to the correct tension. Now, of course, in my own car, I never bother with this, even though I've got the right tool. And I'm sure most people at home won't bother spending £200 or more on a snap-on piece of equipment that you can do without. But as I said, it's someone else's car. I need to make sure I do the job properly. I'm also going to make sure that I cover the wings with some protective covers. These are just cheap covers that you can buy from any auto parts store. Again, on my own car, I tend to just throw a piece of rag over the wings to protect them. And something new. If you're going to continue to follow my series of videos, as we go along, I'm going to be introducing more and more tools into the job. A small compressor like this you're going to find comes in really handy as we go into more and more depth on these cars, specifically on the restoration area. But today I'm going to use this to make sure I blow any muck out from the car and make sure nothing drops into the engine where we definitely don't want it. So to go on the end of that, just a little blower tool. And finally, we're going to use a ratchet strap to put around the bonnet, which will become our second pair of hands. Lee's going to assist me with that. You've seen me use it in a previous video. If you haven't seen that video, you'll see what that's for. A really useful thing to have. And grab yourself a couple of short bungee straps as well. So that's a look at the tools. Now let's look at what we're fitting. Some people, when they do this job, they've been taking off the words are gone. No, connected to the plenum, the throttle body. People take the throttle body off from the plenum. You don't actually need to do that, and that'll save you on a gasket and an awful lot of work. So all you're going to need to do this job is a set of 6 spark plugs and your throttle body gasket. Sorry, your plenum gasket. Oh, it's one of those days, too much to drink. Now, spark plugs. This is another subject I don't want to go into too much. I've decided Mitsubishi use a specific temperature plug according to the manual. They recommend a platinum plug number 6 or a Denso plug. I can't remember the plug number. Just look it up in the manual or find it online. I prefer not to change from what Mitsubishi recommend. However, I've decided to use iridium plugs, which are now available and weren't available when the manual was written. It's exactly the same plug, but iridium is a much stronger metal, so they're going to last a bit longer, give a stronger spark for longer. That's pretty much the only difference. So we've got 6 of those. So I think we've pretty much covered all of the tools. Oh, one final thing. The tips on the iridium plugs and platinum plugs are very sensitive, so be careful if you need to adjust them or clean them. And you're going to be setting the spark gap for 1 millimeter. I believe it's 1 to 1.1 millimeter, but just keep it simple, 1 millimeter setting. I've already checked, all of these are already preset to 1 millimeter, so that saves us some trouble with adjusting those. So, with that all talked about, we'd better get on with the job. So, first part of the video, I'm going to ask Lee to give me a hand with. We're going to use a standard ratchet strap, and we're going to put it around the hood of the car to give us a second pair of hands to hold on to some of the parts to save us taking them all off unnecessarily. So we'll go over the top. And we're going to go roughly to this point here and then tighten it up. Okay, we'll tuck that out the way. Next part, of course, for safety, we're going to disconnect the battery. When disconnecting the battery, always remember it will be the negative terminal first. Just put the wires out the way somewhere safe. And I didn't bring a rag. Now you may have noticed that Lee's got a couple of unusual features on this car that not all of them have. First of all, he doesn't have the cruise control. So instead of having the throttle cable going to a box over there, it's been brought round across the plenum and goes in through the firewall over here. Now this isn't really that much of a problem if you've also got this modification to your car. It just means for those of you that have not got the modification, you're going to do things very slightly differently. You'll also notice that he's got aftermarket HD leads, again not a problem. Where the problem may lie is underneath here where the spark plugs are. You have 3 spark plugs on the front, 3 at the back which are underneath this plenum, and this tends to be the part that scares everyone. So I'm going to show you very simply how to get to those spark plugs without too much fear. We'll start at the front here. You have this cover to remove. There are 8 bolts here, or should be 8. Lee's missing 2, and we discussed this before we started the video. Lee originally had Allen keys in there. I've asked him to put in the bolts just for those of you that have the original parts, what you need to be looking for. So for this, you can use a Phillips screwdriver, but I tend to find that the Phillips screwdriver tends to round off the bolts a little bit. So a simple 10mm wrench, and whip out the 8 bolts. Okay. Cover simply lifts off. Now, as I said, Lee's got aftermarket leads on this car. Nothing at all wrong with these leads as far as I know. But what is really good about these, and if you are buying aftermarket leads, you do need to make sure that you've got the proper sealing type around here. Some of them just have a straightforward cap that goes straight down the middle, and it allows moisture and muck to form inside the head of the car, and then when you pull the plug off, the top off, and unscrew your spark plug, all the muck drops into your engine. So make sure if you're buying aftermarket leads, they have these covers that go over the top. So that's the first part of that done. Next, we're going to tackle this cable here, just to get that out of the way. Again, 10mm wrench, 2 screws here on this one. You don't have this on the types that have the cruise control. However, those of you that do have cruise control, you are still going to see 2 bolts here that hold in this wire retaining box. So you're still going to need to undo those 2 bolts. And we'll just lay that there for now. Then I'm going to come around the side here, and we have 2 bolts here. Remove both bolts completely. Now some people might like to mark where the bolts go, because this is an adjuster for the throttle cable. However, it's not necessary to mark it, and if you forget it, it doesn't matter, because I'll show you how to retension it when we put it back together. As you can see, these are the wrong bolts, they're too long, so there's had to be a washer put in there to take up the gap. Now here's where we can make first use of our bungee strap to hold this up out of the way. How you choose to strap it's entirely up to you. It purely is to get it out of the way. I'll carry on this side. Now over here you've got a cable that runs down here with 2 plugs. Now this isn't on the turbo model, and for those of you that have the turbo model, you're going to notice there's a whole pile of extra hoses and wires over the back here. Don't worry about this if you have the turbo model. This is purely the non-turbo I'm doing today, and next week I'll do a turbo model to show you how to do the rest of it. Now for these 2 plugs, you may or may not need this little pick tool. These 2 plugs, this bottom one's already got its retaining wire missing, so I can just unplug that without any problem. The back one here, you see it's got this metal wire that runs through here and down the sides. This is to stop the clip coming off, the plug coming off accidentally. Now sometimes if you pull really hard, they will come undone, like that one did. But if they don't, you can use your little pick tool underneath that wire there and just lever it up. Take it out completely if you want, and then that will allow you to unplug it. Then you reassemble that wire before plugging it back in, which I'll show you in a minute. So that's that cable out the way. Undo these 2 here, then we can take it further out the way, and this will now allow us to move the plenum completely. Now we'll go round to the other side. On the other side we've got the air filter, air intake, so we're going to remove that to give us a bit more space. You can either do this as one complete part or 2 separate parts. I think for today I'm going to do it as 2 separate parts. Undo this cable here first, simply press on the tab just there and pull out of the way. Loosen off this screw. And then we have 4 retaining clips. Simply push them down. One on this side, one here, and this one you pull up. Whoops. We'll come back to that. And now we lift the airbox out the way. Now on the other end, we've got one here. Loosen that off. And you have this pipe here. Just simply unplug it. Tuck it out the way. That's that out the way. Now we've got another hose over the back here. Now this is what I wanted these pinchers for. These work really, really well because we can get these underneath that clip there, hold it in, move that out the way, and then we can unplug that hose. Nice and easy. Now we're back to the 10mm wrench. We're going to move these cables. Rather than do them one at a time, we'll just remove the whole assembly all in one piece. Now finally, if you look behind here, we've got this thin hose here. You need to disconnect that. Now whichever end you disconnect it from is entirely up to you. Sometimes these hoses are really, really tight on there. So if it doesn't pull off from one end, which this one did, you can pull it off from the other end. And I think we're about ready to undo the plenum. So now you're going to need your 12mm wrench. I've got this on a 3/8 drive with a short extension. Now you need to make sure you get the right bolts here. Do not do these two for your fuel rail. You want the ones behind, the three here that were behind this plastic cable retainer. God, I really did those up. Now we have the two long ones here. That worried me a little bit. I'm dreading one of these break-in. It took me 4 hours to get here. No, there is some down the back. I'm not too worried about those. It was these ones on the front here. Now for the next part, we've got two nuts to undo. There's one underneath this hose here. So to get better access, we'll pull off that hose out the way. So we've got this nut here, and on the opposite side we have another nut. In this case it's got a cable retaining clip, so we'll just loosen that off, like so. Still on your 12mm wrench. Now you remember right at the beginning when we was talking about the tools, I said about having a high power magnet handy, and this is what it's for, because quite often people undo these nuts and then just as they lift off the wrench to get to the nut, it drops down through a hole there into the bowels of the engine, and it is a massive job to get that out. You really don't want that problem. So I have a magnet handy, so that when I go to lift off the wrench, I'll put the magnet there, and hopefully that will catch any parts that come off. Okay, got that one. Now we've got a washer under here. Okay, got that one. Now on to the other side. Just move your cables out the way to give you better access. Now that one I'm absolutely sure I would have dropped if it wasn't for the magnet. And then the cable clip. There we go for the front. Now we're going down the back of the engine. And for that we're going to a 1/2 inch drive with a 12mm socket. Now you can film from that side, I think, or maybe not. Can you get down the back here? Right down the back here, we've got one bolt there. We have one bolt there. And we have two over here. Now ordinarily, this earthing cable would go to one of these bolts, but whoever did work on this car last time has chosen to just put a cable tie on there. We're going to put that back as it should be. So 4 bolts. 1, 2. This is where the job becomes a real nightmare. for those of you with the turbo cars, because down the back here you'll know you've got your turbocharger and a whole bunch of other stuff that's really in the way. But I'm going to show you how to get around all of that in the next video. Here's the first one. Two. Three. Now from this point we should be able to lift the plenum off. Lee, do you happen to have some old rags laying around? Do you have some old rags?
I can get some. How many do you want?
Just a couple of real old ones. Don't bring your wife's best tea towel or anything. So now our bungee strap comes in handy again, and we're going to use this to hold the plenum up for us. Now where you strap it from is entirely up to you. Just make sure it's right up out the way. Okay, we've now exposed certain parts of the engine that we don't want muck in. So Lee's been good enough to grab us a cloth. We'll take out the old gasket, and then we're just going to cover these holes to make sure nothing drops into the engine. Thank you. It's a remarkably clean engine. So now we have access to the 3 spark plugs at the back. Now here's where my extra precautions come in handy, because you remember I mentioned about a compressor and a blower, and if Mitch is able to film down here you'll see exactly why. All this muck here, if we don't blow it out, it's going to fall into the engine, and we definitely don't want it inside the engine. So I'm just going to quickly blow that out. So really. Do the front first, watch your eyes. And then over to the back. Did I mention the service interval for replacing spark plugs? No, I didn't. I always thought it was 60,000 miles, but I read the manual today. And apparently every 15,000 miles you're supposed to replace your plugs. So, however, my car I normally run for 60,000, it still seems fine. But they're so cheap now it doesn't hurt to replace them if you want to keep it in top performance. So now we've got to get the plug tops off. And these are very, very tight ones. Never pull on the cable, there's a chance you're going to pull the cable out of the plug. But normally a bit of twisting and turning and pulling and they're off. Because they're different lengths, you're not going to get them mixed up. That's 3. And then on the front. Great. Now when we change the plugs, I'm going to do them one plug at a time. This way I don't leave any holes exposed unnecessarily. So if you have your first plug ready, and get your wrench, which is in my pocket, and we'll have no, I'm going to have a long extension. Now with your plug removing socket, you'll see that there's a rubber ring inside there. That hopefully will hold on to the top of the plug, otherwise you'll have difficulty getting the plug out of the hole. So it gives a slight tension to stop it dropping out of the hole. So I'm going to start at this end. Oh, that was rather loose. There we go. And that spark plug gap looks wrong. I'll just check. Oh no, it's right. So we'll have a fuss replacement in there. Now if this happens to drop out of your socket piece, make sure you get the spark plug out and then check it again, just in case you've damaged the tip in any way. Check it's not going to drop out. Slowly slide down the hole and screw it in. Now because this is Lee's car and not mine, we're going to use a proper torque wrench set to 25 Newton meters or 15 pounds, and we're going to do it up. Okay, now for those of you that don't have a torque wrench, you're going to find that as you do it up, you're going to feel it go slightly tight for a while, and then you go just that little bit further. You don't want to do it up really, really tight. If you go just a little bit further, you'll see on the ends of the spark plugs, we have this gasket here. And when you go just that little bit further, it just crushes the gasket very slightly to create a good tight seal. And that's as much as you need. Don't go over tightening them, because you're screwing into an aluminium head and you're going to damage the thread. So that's the first plug done. Now we'll move on to the next one. Two. Well, someone didn't use a torque wrench on these, because some are loose and some are tight. They're not a very healthy colour actually, Lee. That's a little issue you might want to take care of. Now we're on to the back ones. Exactly the same as the front. As I already said, I have checked all these plugs earlier to make sure they're all on the right adjustment for 1mm, so I've not had to spend time now going through them all again. There's always one. There we go. One final one. It's always a pleasure to work on nice clean cars like this. Some of them you spend more time cleaning the car ready to do the job than you actually do on the job. This one doesn't want to come. And of course it has to be the one down the back, the one hardest to get to. Hey, help! Got any chewing gum?
Yeah, I got some.
Ah, got it. That was lucky. Didn't want to have to turn the car upside down to get it out. There we go, all back in. Now we've got to put our leads back on. As I said, the leads are easy enough to identify even without the numbers that some people put on there, because they're all different lengths and they should only reach to the correct plug. That's the beauty of using original Mitsubishi parts rather than aftermarket parts, that they tend to make a bit more generic and you have to perhaps work them a little bit to get them into place. There we go. Now, to save the risk of any muck getting blown into the engine, at this point we want to cover the holes up as soon as possible. So what we're going to do now is get the new gasket. You have that. Thank you. Carefully remove our rags, make sure there's nothing going to fall in. Get your new gasket on. And now we can unhook our plenum. And there we go. We'll hook this back up out the way, just for now. And then we start everything in reverse. 4 bolts. Now, Lee, do you have a pair of side cutters, wire cutters, or scissors? We've just got to get this cable tie off that someone's used. While he's looking for those, I'll start at the other end. 4 bolts. Now, we're not going to do these bolts up at this time. We're just going to screw them in by hand as far as we can with your fingers, just to get it into the right position. Thank you very much. We'll snap that cable tie off there. I can assure you that's not a Mitsubishi part. There we go. Just so we get that in place now, and don't forget it, that needs to be screwed in here. And the 4th one. Now, for those of you watching my channel for the first time, I just want to remind everyone, these are not professional videos, these are home DIY videos for the average man. And I'm not a scientist or a professional mechanic or anything skilled or special. Sometimes I'm going to forget things, sometimes I'm going to make mistakes, sometimes there's going to be people out there that have better ideas than me, so please put your ideas forward. I just do the best I can with what I know. Now, getting your plenum back on this side. We have your little cable retainer, and onto that a single washer, and on with an 8mm thread. Now, again, we're just going to tighten these down finger tight at the moment, because if you tighten anything solid at this point, there may be another hole that won't go into position. So by leaving it very slightly loose, it enables us to get all of the bolts all lined up, ready to tighten it down. Same on the other side. 1 washer, 1 nut. Then we have two long bolts, 12mm head and a damn long thread. Three shorter bolts. Lee, I noticed you had a lot of spare nuts and bolts in bags. Do you want to see if you've got one that's, where was that one? Do you want one that's a little bit shorter than that? Okay, that's as much as I can get with my fingers. But now all of the bolts are in position, we're ready to tighten it down a little bit more. Now with these back ones, make sure you get these well done up as tight as you can with your fingers, just to make sure it's back as far as it needs to be. That will automatically put your front in position. So again, we're on our 12mm. Start in the middle. Now there is a specific torque for these, I'm afraid I don't remember what it is, but if you just give them a good nip up, nothing really overly wrenched, then to the outside. Onto the top one here. And on this side. An interesting noise. And here. The beauty of using a slightly smaller wrench is it won't allow you to really tighten it up as much as you would with a big wrench that will give you extra torque. Okay, now we can tighten up the back ones. For that I'm going to a 1/2 inch wrench. Again, don't over tighten them, you are tightening into an aluminium, so just nip it up to keep it solid. I think most people now have access to manuals for these, so you can look up all the correct torque settings if you're lucky enough or rich enough to have a proper torque wrench. Now what will we do next? I think we'll put in the hose next. And a rubber hose on this side. Now we have a cable, goes through here. That gets that nice and tidy. Now we've got 2 bolts to go on here. But I just remembered Leah's got a slightly different cable here. So we've now got to remember to put that in place as well. In fact, I'm going to leave that for a minute because that runs across the top of the engine. We'll get the other parts on first. So 3 front HT leads. As I said, these aftermarket ones are never quite the right size, so you might have to play with it a little bit to get them to fit. I think it's because they make them generically and don't worry about the odd couple of millimetres oversized that they are. Okay, and I'll put the cover back on as well while we're here. Should be 8 screws with 10mm heads, or Phillips if you prefer. Some of these threads are not very good. That's sort of my fault because I asked Lee to go back to the original bolts for this video, and the bolts are not very good, so I may not tighten those down fully. I don't want to risk damaging the thread in the rocker cover. Now, these ones you don't want to do up too tight. It's just a gentle nip just to hold them in place, stop them working loose, because this is plastic that you're going into. That's that. Now over here, we have this thin hose that we pulled off. That's going on to here. Like so. Now we can put this cable retainer back on. 2 screws. I can't help thinking it should be these 2. Again, you're screwing into aluminium, just gently nip them up. Okay, over the back here, remember we had these 2 cables, and one of them had a metal wire through it that I took out to show you. So we've got to get that back in. Now these are a bit of a problem at times. You get them in the best you can, and then you get so far and then they try to come through the bottom there. So here's where those pesky kids come in handy, because they've got little fingers. You're going to need your little pick tool. And I do hope this doesn't take too long because we're on video, but you've got to get it outside of the wall before you push it down. And I hate doing these because they can be a problem. That's one side, but usually when you try to do the other side, the first side will pop out again. No doubt there's some miracle tool someone's going to tell me about after the fact. Might cut the video just for a second while I do this. I don't want to spend video time just showing you how to put these clips in, when I'm sure you can work it out for yourself. Now sometimes you get egg on your face, and sometimes the student teaches the teacher. And my son just told me, "What the hell are you doing? You're an idiot. This is the way to do it." The answer is you put the plug on first, and then you can put the clip on, and it drops straight into place without any work at all. So this is the face of an idiot. I don't know if he wants to turn the camera around. So there's a lesson we all learnt now. You wouldn't believe the hours I've spent messing with those things. Okay, now we can bring the throttle cable back round. And did you manage to find that extra shorter screw? No. Okay, never mind. We're going to have to put in the screws that we've got. So we've got one here. And oops, I nearly lost it. One here. And we're just going to do those finger tight first of all. While I'll grab a wrench. And what we're going to do now, you see you've got slack cable here. You're just going to move that up until the cable is no longer slack but not pulling on the cable. You're just going to take that slackness up, and that's where you're going to tighten it. And finally, while we're down the back here, we have this final hose to go on.
Just to confirm, you put both plugs on?
Yes, I did put both plugs on. And I'm going to use Grandad's old pincers again, because I really do like those for this job. Even though I've got the right tool, I find these so much easier to use. There we go. Now we're back to the air filter. Where did I put that? In 2 sections? Oh, or 3 in your case now. How did we end up with 3 sections? Okay. So we'll start off with this one. I never normally undo the middle one, but it must have already been loose and it's just fallen off. We're not going to do up any screws at this point, but we can put this hose on here. And I just forgot that cable down there, so we'll put that back in place. Second one just here. Now you notice we've got little arrows on here. If you line up the arrows, you should be pretty much in position. Thank you very much. And then this one. And we've still got that clip that I dropped over there, so I need to get that as well. If you find your rubber's getting a bit hard and you're struggling to put any of these bits back in, you can just put a smear of Vaseline or a little bit of WD-40 along the joining points, and you'll find they'll slip in nicely. Yeah, I think it went on the under tray. Yeah, I see it down there. Right and down. 2, thank you very much, Lee. And 3. And then on this side, 4. Okay, and then a cable, which we plug in there, and then finally we'll tighten these up. Don't over tighten, you don't want to cut into your rubber. Just enough to make sure they're not going to move and you get a good air seal. couple of cables that have come off here, just to keep things nice and tidy. That's those. And I do believe we're on our final 2 screws to finish the job. So there we go. Have I forgotten anything? Did you learn anything, Lee?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Good.
I mean, I've seen them on videos, but it's so much easier just to see somebody do it.
It's even better when someone comes to your house and does it for free, isn't it?
That's amazing.
So that concludes today's video. I hope everyone's learnt something from it. If you have the twin turbo model, look out for the upcoming video on the twin turbo version of doing the same job. And don't forget, if you're anywhere else in the world other than England, the competition is still open to you. You can look at the rules on the forum and find out what you need to do to enter and what the conditions are. I've also got another video coming in a couple of weeks' time. If you remember, Vadim was a second winner in the UK. He's asked for the cam belt change, as did lots and lots of other people. So we're going to be doing a full cam belt change in an upcoming video. For now, I want to thank Lee for entering the competition and for letting me work on his lovely car. So thank you, Lee. And we'll see you on the next video.